At first, I thought I'd be able to slip into the background, just keep my head down, and let things run their course. But in a place like this, where everyone seemed to already have their own groups and loyalties, it quickly became clear that standing out was inevitable. There was a tension in the air, the kind that made you feel like an outsider, even though most of the faces looked friendly enough. The kids at this school were different from anyone I'd known back in Philly. They had a way about them, sharp, hard, like they were always on guard or proving a point. The Italians had their own circle, the Dutch Lutherans had theirs, and even the black families seemed to know just where they belonged. It was a melting pot, sure, but every group had its rules, its boundaries, and its own way of looking at the world. Fitting in wasn't as tough as I'd thought, at least on the surface, but something felt off. I missed the familiar noise of the city, the way I could walk down any block and see faces I recognized. Here, people were friendly enough, but I could tell they were watching me, sizing me up, waiting to see what kind of guy I'd turn out to be. That's when I realized, blending in here wouldn't be enough. This place was going to change me, for better or worse, and whether I liked it or not. After graduating, I stayed in that neighborhood, mainly to be close to my family. I'd still make trips to my old stomping grounds and kept in touch with my friends from back home. My first job was driving a fuel oil truck, delivering fuel around town. Within a couple of years, I'd moved inside, handling dispatch and taking orders. Turns out I had a knack for the business, and I could already picture myself owning a similar place one day. When it came to making friends, especially with women, I didn't have much trouble, and my social life ended up even better than I expected. When I got married, my mom was a little let down that my new wife, Lucy, wasn't Italian. But, she still did her best to welcome Lucy wholeheartedly. Once we had our 2 kids, Lucy insisted I get my hair cut, which I didn't mind. As soon as the kids were off to school, though, Lucy wanted to start working. My dad always thought wives and mothers shouldn't work outside the home. I can't say I fully understood his reasoning back then, but looking back, it sort of makes sense. I didn't mind Lucy wanting to work, but her spending time with old friends from her school days didn't sit well with me. There were some I could get along with, but I wasn't too keen on all of them. Back in high school, she was big on all sorts of school activities and thrived in them. I was the opposite. I kept my distance from that crowd. To me, it always looked like a bunch of show-offs patting each other on the back. Lucy and I both had our fair share of dating before we got together, but we never felt the need to talk about it, it just wasn't a topic that came up. Our marriage had been steady for about 10 years when I felt things starting to unravel. Lucy worked in the claims department at a national insurance company in town, and I started noticing her working late and putting in extra time on weekends. By 6 months in, I knew things were heading south. When this work seminar came up, Lucy tried to reassure me, saying, "Jake, I don't get why this is such an issue. It's just 3 days. I already talked to your mom, and she's fine watching the kids while I'm gone. You'll be here in the evenings, and you know you can take care of yourself." I couldn't believe she'd even ask me to be okay with that. "Who's going to this seminar?" I asked, feeling my patience wear thin. Her face brightened a little. "Oh, just 6 of us from the department, Betty Klink from HR, and, well, Rodney." I chuckled when she said his name, hiding my surprise that she hadn't picked up on what I already knew. I'd been aware of her lunches and late nights with her boss, Rodney Kent, for a while now. Lucy and Rodney had grown up in the same town. He was that kid in school who joined every club and did everything except sports. "You must really think I'm an idiot, Lucy." She looked confused. "I don't know what you mean. What are you getting at?" "Lucy, I've known about you and Rodney for 6 months. If you think I'm letting you take off for 3 days with him, you're out of your mind." "Jake, seriously, what are you even talking about? Rodney's my boss. There's nothing between us, and you know I'd never do that to you." I glanced down at the empty Budweiser can in my hand, then got up slowly, heading toward the kitchen. I crushed the can in my fist and tossed it at the trash. It missed, but I couldn't be bothered to pick it up. The fresh can hissed as I cracked it open, and I took my seat again. Lucy sat there quietly, waiting for me to say something. "You're the mother of my kids, and you're good to them. That's the only reason I haven't kicked you out of the house. I even talked it over with my mom, told her everything. She advised me to hold strong for the kids' sake and see if you could handle this. If I walk away, the court will give you custody of my boys, and that's something I can't allow." "Did you tell your mom I was cheating on you?" she asked. "No. Some woman from her church told her. When Mom asked me about it, I didn't bother to deny it." Her face twisted in disbelief. "You're not serious. You can't mean that. Why are you even saying these things?" I took a deep swig of my beer, giving her a long look. "Rodney lives at 321 Elm Street. It's 3 blocks from your office. You go over there with him, usually 3 times a week, and you're there for almost 3 hours each time. Care to explain what you're doing at his place for that long? After that, maybe you can tell me what overtime you're putting in at work. Oh, and by the way, the cleaning lady at your office goes to church with my mom." Lucy's shoulders drooped, and her bottom lip started to quiver. "As long as you don't drag our family's name through the mud in public, I won't put up a fight. But if you do, all bets are off. You can leave, stay, whatever. But you're not taking my sons away from me." She was clearly upset as she sprang to her feet. "Damn you, Jake. I hate you, you miserable jerk," she spat as she stormed out, sobbing. It was the first time she'd ever sworn at me, and the first time she'd thrown in a low jab about my background. Her stubborn streak finally broke free. We had 2 boys, Sam and Mike, who shared a bunk bed in their room. The 3rd bedroom doubled as a catch-all room, where I ended up sleeping from that night on. It was a rented house, but we'd managed to save over $60,000 for a down payment on our dream home. That dream, however, had turned into something of a nightmare. From then on, we never mentioned the seminar again. Lucy stopped working overtime and started bringing her lunch from home. While the air at home was more icy than chilly, things did seem to be calming down. Mom's church friends weren't saying anything new, but I couldn't shake a nagging feeling of unease. At that point, intimacy had vanished, but I wasn't planning to let things go on like that for too long. Against my better judgment, I agreed to go with Lucy to her company's Christmas party. I didn't want her attending on her own, and I figured I could keep a low profile and have a quiet evening. Good in theory, but it didn't quite pan out that way. The company had rented a hall with a dance floor, a buffet, and a couple of open bars. I could nurse 3 beers through the night and stay under the radar. By the time we got there, though, the only tables left were near the higher-ups. It was obvious the other employees were steering clear of those spots. For the first hour or so, things seemed normal. I noticed Rodney hanging out with his buddies on the far side of the room. Some of the guys from Lucy's team asked her to dance, while Rodney kept a low profile. I didn't mind her dancing with others since I wasn't looking to hit the dance floor myself. I was just getting into my 3rd beer when I noticed Lucy and Rodney sneaking glances at each other. It wasn't much, just some nods and slight head movements, but it was enough to make me suspicious. I did my best to act indifferent and uninterested, but my eyes stayed glued to them. Lucy excused herself to go to the ladies' room, and I casually glanced around the hall. Rodney was nowhere to be seen. I couldn't believe it. Later, when we went over the whole thing at home, I realized how utterly foolish she'd been to try meeting up with the guy right under my nose. She had all the time in the world to see him at work, with 0 chance of me showing up, yet here she was, risking it. The only reason I could think of was that she wanted to humiliate me, making a show of it by sneaking around with Rodney right there at her workplace event. She was putting the horns on me for everyone to see. I noticed a few of Rodney's pals huddled near one of the bars, grinning like idiots. When Lucy walked down the hall toward the restrooms, she gave a quick glance back to check if I was still seated, then slipped out of sight. On my way to the restrooms, I stopped by the head table and leaned in, making a little apology for disturbing the party. The guys down the hall who'd been grinning suddenly looked uneasy, like they had no idea how to help out their buddy Rodney. I checked the ladies' room first, but it was empty. Then, I tried the men's room, and there they were, clear as day, locked in an embrace. Rodney had his back to me, one hand up her skirt, and she wasn't resisting in the slightest. I didn't hesitate, I grabbed Rodney by the neck, stepped to the side, and slammed his head into the bathroom wall. I definitely heard something break. Lucy was screaming my name over and over, but I barely registered it. I spun Rodney around, and blood from his busted nose splattered onto my shirt. He was stumbling but still standing, so I gave him a hard punch in the stomach. He dropped and immediately started vomiting while Lucy pulled at my sleeve, trying to stop me. Dragging him by his tie, I marched Rodney into the middle of the hall. I'm pretty sure he was choking, but I couldn't have cared less. The band had stopped playing, and all eyes were on us as I tossed him around. I scanned the room, but nobody seemed eager to step up and help him. "Sorry to ruin your fancy party," I said. "I'm out of here, but my wife is all yours for the night. Make sure she gets home when you're done with her." Rodney was on his hands and knees, struggling to get up, his face a bloody mess. Lucy stood in the doorway, stunned, mouth hanging open. I couldn't tell if she was more horrified by what I'd done to her boyfriend or by the words I'd just spoken to her colleagues. Either way, it didn't matter to me. I noticed Rodney was standing right beneath the mistletoe, so I couldn't resist. I delivered a solid kick to his groin that he'd be feeling for a week, sending him sprawling forward onto his face again. That one had to hurt. The entire room fell silent. I called my mom from the car, asking her to swing by the house and pick up the boys. I figured getting out of town for a few days was a good idea, and I didn't want the kids left in Lucy's care. I doubted she'd be in any shape to handle them properly. With no real plan, I hit the road, unsure of where I'd go. My boss had no issue with giving me an impromptu week off. When I got home, Mom and Dad were already there. I paid the babysitter and helped gather the boys' things. My own bag was mostly socks and underwear, but I threw in a couple of shirts and pants, just to be safe. Before leaving, I went down to the basement and retrieved a stash of cash I'd hidden in the rafters. Banks barely paid any interest on savings accounts, so I figured I might as well keep it close. Yeah, I know, keeping $62,000 in cash at home sounds ridiculous. But my mom always kept her own little piles hidden all over the house, so maybe I inherited that habit from her. I was about to switch off the lights when a cab pulled up outside, and out stepped Lucy. She walked in, sank onto the couch without saying a word, looking more worried than angry. Frustration and fear seemed to be written all over her face. "I told you once, there's only one rule, don't make a fool of me or our family in front of others. But you just couldn't help yourself, could you?" I let her sit there, tears forming in her eyes, and then walked out the door. A little after 9, I was already on the Schuylkill Expressway, thinking about how that party had been cut short, at least for me. I figured a few days in Atlantic City might help clear my head before heading back. But first, I needed to check in with my old buddy, Sal. Sal had a sandwich shop in our old neighborhood, not the kind you see on Philly travel shows, more a local joint for folks nearby. The shop wasn't his main income, though. He had other ventures that most of us either didn't mention or got involved in ourselves. He lived upstairs, with a back room where he conducted business. When I walked in, it felt like I'd stepped back in time. I filled him in on my situation, and he agreed to help me out. "Jake, this'll cost you a little something. $20 should cover it. Can you swing that, or do you need a hand?" "No problem, Sal, I'll pay it forward." He raised an eyebrow. "So, you want this done quietly or out in the open?" Let's keep it simple and straightforward, no mess, no fuss. Need to go away for a bit? He asked. You ready for it? Actually, I was thinking about heading to Atlantic City. How about 6 days and 6 nights at the Taj? I squinted at him. What are you talking about, Sal? I've got some acquaintances. This could end up pretty profitable for you, he said with a smirk. Works for me. And yeah, I'm going alone, this all just kind of fell into place. Haven't had a chance to invite anyone. You don't have to fly solo, he said with a grin. Let me get someone to keep you company, just to verify you're there. Hang on a second. Sal picked up the phone and dialed a familiar number. Carla, it's Sal. Get dolled up and come over here. No, it's not like that, you're going on a little vacation. He chuckled as he hung up. Jake, you remember Carla? My brother Mike's oldest girl. Sure do, the little chubby kid with big brown eyes who was always laughing. How old is she now? Sal grinned at my memory. She's 23 now, Jake, and she's not chubby anymore. It hit me that Carla would be tagging along to the beach. Felt a bit strange since she was Sal's niece, but hey, he was the one setting it up. Jake, you got a credit card? I've got 2. Was planning to cancel them Monday. Don't do that. I need you to use those cards, meals, room service, even some cash advances from the casino if needed. Just don't overdo it. You need a paper trail showing you were there. Use them a bit each day so it doesn't look like you snuck home. It might cost you a couple $1,000, but it's a cheap way to cover yourself. Sal knew his stuff, and I had to admit it all made sense. Just as I was mulling it over, Carla walked in. Jake. I haven't seen you since you left the neighborhood. You're looking well. Now it all made sense why Sal had that grin on his face. Carla had turned into an absolute knockout, her dark eyes were captivating, and any of the softness she'd had as a kid seemed to have settled in all the right places. I jumped up so fast I nearly tipped my chair over. Jake could use some company in Atlantic City for a few days. Are you up for it? Sal asked. Her expression changed a little when she heard that. Wait, aren't you still married? She directed the question straight at me. Before I could reply, Sal chimed in. The marriage is long gone, Carla. Jake just needs a friend to lean on. I figured you'd be perfect for the job, especially since you always had a soft spot for him. Sal, I'm not about to be the one to mess up someone's family, Carla replied. It's not fair to ask me. Besides, I'm not one of your working girls. Why not just get him someone else to go along? I'm not asking you to sleep with him, just keep him company, help him shake off some of this mess, Sal explained. Carla gave him a thoughtful look, as if she was figuring out the bigger picture. Beautiful as she was sharp too. She looked over at me, a hint of a smile on her lips. All right, Jake, I'll go with you, on one condition. You've got to buy me saltwater taffy. Sal and I both cracked up. It'll take me about an hour to get my things together, she said. And Sal, don't give him any drinks, I want him sober when we get there, she added with a wink as she left. With Carla gone, Sal and I went over the plan again. He took the $20,000 I handed him and promised me everything was covered. The trip to Atlantic City went off without a hitch, though I did have to tell Carla a bit about the trouble with Lucy. All she said was, "Oh, those poor kids." When she saw the double beds in the hotel room, she raised an eyebrow, but thankfully, she missed my smirk. I had a feeling only one of those beds would see any use. We gambled a bit, but nothing major. I knew enough to realize I was never going to come out ahead in a place like that. Carla was happy playing the quarter slots, and I was just killing time. We mostly spent our days strolling the boardwalk, grabbing bites to eat, and catching shows around town. The first night, I was the perfect gentleman, but by noon on day 2, Carla and I were already tearing up the sheets. My mom had been right about marrying an Italian girl. It felt natural, like I hadn't cheated at all. On the fourth evening, we were about to head out for dinner when two men in sports jackets knocked on our door. "Jake Thompson," one of them asked, holding out a badge. "I'm Ray Fritz, and this here's my partner, Rupert Marks. We're with the Berks County Major Crimes Unit. Can we have a word?" Just then, Carla came out of the bathroom in her bra and panties. She glanced over at the two detectives, then casually walked to the bed and slipped into her robe, looking a little embarrassed but not entirely surprised. "What can I help you with, gentlemen?" I asked, trying to keep my cool. "We need to talk to you about your relationship with Rodney Kent," Fritz said. "My relationship? I didn't have any relationship with him. My wife did." For some reason, the two men looked a bit uncomfortable. Fritz tried to keep the conversation going, while his partner, Marks, couldn't keep his eyes off Carla. "Mr. Thompson, we understand that. But we also know you had a talk with him last Friday at the Continental Insurance Christmas party. What for? Is he filing charges?" "No, he's vanished, and we were hoping you might help us track him down," Fritz replied. "Gentlemen, before we go any further, I'd like someone from the Atlantic City Police Department here, and I don't mean the desk cop. If that's not doable, then I'm calling my lawyer from Reading." Neither detective reacted. "Carla, get dressed. We're heading out for dinner." "Sorry, guys, but we have a reservation at 6. Steaks at the safari are incredible," I added, shrugging. "I'll be back in Reading on Friday. Would you prefer I come by then to discuss this?" The two detectives seemed a bit taken aback. "Why do you think something's happened to the guy?" "Maybe he just skipped town for a while," I said. "He was last seen getting into a cab outside the community hospital on Sunday morning, and no one's heard from him since," one of them replied. By then, Carla was dressed, and I was pulling on my jacket. "Well, I've been here since Friday night. Check with the hotel staff if you want. Now, if you'll excuse us, we've got a dinner to get to. Any other questions?" "Yeah, but they'll have to wait until Friday. We'll expect to see you then." I nodded and showed them out, guiding them down to the lobby in silence. Once there, they headed off to hotel security, while Carla and I made our way to the safari for dinner. By the time I got home, Sam and Mike were thrilled to see me, practically bouncing off the walls. The saltwater taffy I'd brought back was a big hit. Lucy, though, was cool and distant, clearly uneasy. After speaking with the police, I spent the rest of the day with the boys, knowing I'd need to confront Lucy that evening. Later, after the boys settled down to watch TV, I sat in the kitchen, waiting for Lucy to finish tidying up. She was moving slowly, like she was avoiding the conversation, but I stayed put. Finally, she turned and joined me, resting her elbows on the countertop. "What did you do to Rodney?" she asked, not accusatory or angry, just curious. She looked me in the eye, then glanced around the room, like she was expecting a confession. "I was in Atlantic City all week. I haven't laid eyes on Rodney since the party," I said. "You hurt him, didn't you?" "I hope you did. He ended up in the hospital for 2 days with a broken jaw and nose." "He earned it," I replied, not flinching. After that, she seemed to be at a loss for words. "So, what were you doing with him in the men's room?" I waited for an answer, but she stayed silent. "And why did he have his hand up your skirt?" Still nothing. Lucy tightened her hands together, staring down at the countertop. "Why aren't you at work? And what's with the kids being home on a school day?" "I had to leave my job. Couldn't face going back there. I pulled the boys from school since your mom mentioned you'd be home today. I figured it was time for a straight talk. I told you once, there's only one rule, don't bring shame on me or the family. It's as simple as that. So why'd you go and break it? Why did you both feel the need to destroy everything?" The longer we sat there, the more jittery Lucy became. Finally, I slammed my fist down on the table. I said, "Why? For God's sake, answer me." Her voice shook as she blurted out, "I don't know why. It just happened. You were sitting there looking all lost, like a helpless puppy, and we thought we could take advantage of it. We didn't expect you to go nuts like that, you were acting crazy." It scared me. I'd managed to get some real reaction out of her, but none of it added up. I didn't waste time trying to make sense of her words. What they'd done was stupid, especially doing it right in front of me. They could have met up any time before the party, and I'd have been none the wiser. No, they'd chosen that moment just to humiliate me. All her excuses couldn't change that. "Lucy, you've got 3 options. You can stay here and be a proper mother to your kids, you can get a divorce and leave without them, or you can simply vanish. If you stay, we're done as husband and wife, and I won't stand for another affair with Rodney or anyone else." At the mention of Rodney's name, she broke down in tears. Without saying a word, she ran out of the room, sobbing, before she could make any decision. "We'll pick this up tomorrow," I said quietly as she left. Adjustments were necessary. I found a small apartment a few blocks away, close enough for the boys to visit whenever they wanted. Carla moved in with me. The police questioned me a few more times, but then the calls stopped. Rodney Kent was last seen getting into a cab outside the hospital and hadn't been spotted since. His family even offered a reward, but no one came forward with any information. I still joined Lucy and the boys for dinner every night and spent as much time as I could with my sons on weekends. It was clear to everyone that Lucy and I were no longer a couple, though technically we remained married. She started spending more time with her family, and I didn't mind. There was no sign of her seeing anyone else. Right after the Christmas party, she'd quit her job and didn't show any interest in finding new work. We never revisited the conversation from that first night I got back. She played her part as a good mother, kept the house tidy, made sure the boys were well fed and had clean clothes. I took on all the outdoor chores. Each week, I gave Lucy $200 for household expenses, food, and whatever she needed. I always asked if she needed more, but she always declined. We didn't have credit cards anymore. On Thanksgiving and Christmas, the boys and I would spend the holidays with my family, and Carla would often join us. Lucy stayed with her family during the holidays, but the boys would be with us on Christmas Eve. Whenever Terry or Mike wanted to talk about what was going on between their mom and me, it was awkward, but we both avoided discussing it with them. I appreciated Lucy keeping that line as well, though honestly, what was there to say? This whole arrangement dragged on for years, and what I'm describing only scratches the surface. We had our share of tensions and disagreements, but somehow, we kept it together. In the beginning, Carla and I were doing well. Over time, though, she started visiting her family in Philly more often and spending less time with me. I couldn't hold it against her, I owed her for helping me get through the split. Given the situation, I couldn't divorce Lucy, and as long as the boys were at home, I didn't feel right about forcing her out of the house. These were all my own rules, but I made myself stick to them. I despised the whole mess but didn't see any other way. The boys, however, found one. When Terry turned 16, things finally came to a head. A new kid at his school, who happened to be related to Lucy's former fling, Rodney, began harassing Terry about the whole situation. It was the first time anything like this had come up, and Terry didn't know how to handle it. Before long, Rodney's nephew ended up in the hospital, and I had to go down to the school to pick Terry up. They suspended him for 2 weeks and slapped him with an assault charge. Rick, unfortunately, had been there when it all went down, and he jumped in to help his brother. He lost 2 teeth but earned Terry's admiration for sticking up for him. When I got the boys home, Lucy was waiting at the door. Terry wasted no time unloading his frustration on her, demanding to know why she'd kept what had happened all those years ago a secret. Lucy didn't argue back or defend herself, she just stood there, quietly letting him vent. I left them to it and took Rick to the dentist. He wasn't too bothered by his missing teeth, but I couldn't say I felt the same way about the bill that was coming. When Rick and I returned, Lucy was gone. Her car was still in the driveway, but she'd taken off, according to Terry, without saying a word or giving any hint of where she was headed. I took a week off from work to get things sorted. I reached out to her parents and sister, but they wouldn't speak to me. After a week, I was no closer to understanding her intentions or whereabouts. Carla and I moved into the house. Sleeping in the same bed felt strange at first, but the boys seemed to take it better than I expected. One day while I was at work, everything in the house connected to Lucy, her clothes, personal items, all of it, vanished. I didn't know where Carla had taken it, and honestly, I didn't ask. Carla naturally slipped into the role, handling all the things Lucy used to take care of. I got her a few credit cards to make managing the household easier. It was a strange feeling, trusting Carla more than I ever had Lucy, but that's where we were. I sold Lucy's car and bought a new one for Carla. With these changes, family gatherings became easier, Carla seemed genuinely happy, and my mother was overjoyed. Terry and Rick were doing well in school, and Rodney's nephew never showed his face again. Things were finally falling into place, though I was still technically married. I waited 2 months before filing a missing person report for Lucy. I classified her as a runaway spouse, just to have it on record for the divorce process. A couple more months later, I filed for divorce on the grounds of abandonment. I'd planned everything carefully, knowing she needed to be absent a year for the divorce to go through. Gradually, family life started to feel normal again. Terry and Rick had no problem accepting Carla. They never called her Mom, just Carla, but that was fine. We felt more like a family than we had in years. Eventually, I finalized the divorce and, 2 weeks later, Carla and I drove down to Elkton and tied the knot. Finally, I was free, and we were a family again. Not long after, Terry graduated from high school and joined the Air Force, and a year later, Rick headed off to Toledo to attend a meat-cutting school. It all seemed to happen so fast. Suddenly, Carla and I were alone. We didn't hear anything from Lucy. My parents had moved to a cottage, promising we'd all get together at least a couple of times a year. There wasn't much holding us in reading anymore, so Carla and I made the move back to Philadelphia. Once Rick finished school, he landed a job at an upscale butcher shop in Westchester. We saw him a few times a month, and he always brought something new and tasty for us to try. About a year later, one of Carla's nieces was getting married, so naturally, we went. Italian weddings in Philly are a big deal, lots of family, friends, and, of course, plenty of folks just there for the free food and drinks. But with food and drinks flowing, no one really minded. We were having a good time with some friends when I noticed Carla seemed a little uneasy. I caught her glancing across the dance floor several times, like something had caught her attention. I looked over but didn't see anything out of the ordinary. I didn't think much of it until Carla excused herself to go to the ladies' room. Watching her, I saw her head down the hallway to meet up with an old friend. They were talking and laughing, posing for photos, all looking perfectly innocent. Instead of heading to the restroom, Carla went over to one of Sal's assistants. She motioned to the table where her friend had just come from. At that table sat 3 guys and 3 girls, all of them looking like they were trying too hard to play tough. The girls were dressed a little too boldly, each one with a look that was somewhere between flirty and sleazy. Carla came back to me with a thoughtful look, but she seemed composed and confident. "Jake, we've got a bit of a situation," Carla said, her expression serious. "I gathered that from all your pacing. Care to fill me in?" She took a deep breath. "Listen, you've got to stay calm. In a minute, one of those guys at Gina's table is going to come over here and try to rile you up with some insults, probably about me. He's hoping you'll react so they can jump you. And you're expecting me to just let him get away with that? Go along with him for a bit, at least until Sal's guys get in position. You might need to handle one of them yourself, but that's about it. I gave her a skeptical look. What do you mean, go along with him? Let him say what he wants. If he calls me names, go with it. If he says something like I'm for sale, play along, ask him what he's willing to pay. Just don't let him get to you, no matter what. And how did this whole mess come about? What exactly did I do to these guys? Carla motioned toward Gina's table. See the woman with the short platinum hair? Look closely. I squinted and, sure enough, recognized her. Wait, that's Lucy. Yep, Carla confirmed. Apparently, Lucy's new boyfriend has ties to the groom. The moment she saw you were here, she decided to use it as a chance for revenge. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. My ex-wife had gone out of her way to set up this elaborate plan to embarrass me in front of Carla's family. I felt a mix of rage and an odd sort of relief as I saw Sal's men discreetly moving into place around the dance hall. I knew I could handle it, but I didn't want Lucy to ruin Carla's niece's wedding. About 10 minutes later, Lucy's boyfriend got up, and I excused myself from the table, murmuring an apology to everyone. Carla gave me a knowing look but didn't say anything. I strolled casually over to the fire exit, where folks went to smoke. Lucy's boyfriend gave a slight nod, and two of his pals got up to follow. They didn't notice the three of Sal's guys with Louisville sluggers coming up behind them from the bar. There were about 6 other people smoking by the exit, and when I asked them to clear out, they picked up on the tension and quickly made themselves scarce. I walked about 20 paces from the door, turned around, and waited. Lucy's crew strolled out, all smug, but their grins vanished as soon as they turned and saw Sal's guys waiting with bats, and the bride's father standing there, too. The whole thing was over in 30 seconds flat. I never even had to lift a hand. When it was done, the bride's father approached me. Apologies if I caused any trouble for your family tonight, I said, extending my hand. He shook it, nodding. Thanks for taking it outside. I thanked Sal's guys for handling things and went off to find Carla. They stayed back to clean up, but I couldn't find her. Lucy's table was empty, too. Rick spotted me at the bar, getting a fresh drink, and wandered over with a grin. Dad, what on earth just happened? I thought about brushing it off but decided he had a right to know. Your mom was here with her new boyfriend. That's all you need to know. He chuckled, ordered himself a beer, and we spent the next hour talking about anything but Lucy. Eventually, Carla showed up, a bit disheveled. Where'd you disappear to? I asked. She gave me a sly grin. Gina and I had to take your ex to the hospital. She wasn't feeling her best. Rick and I burst out laughing. Jake, can we finally go home now? She asked, looking tired but satisfied. The night had been long and messy but surprisingly turned out all right. We never saw Lucy again. Carla and I are still together, back in the old neighborhood. Life has a funny way of coming full circle, and, honestly, I couldn't be happier.